I started writing this as a blog, and with my not so scary Halloween party going on over on my blog, I thought, okay, well, I get a ton of questions, a ton of messages all the time about my anxiety disorder. I get tons of questions about how I handle it, about, kind of like where it started, how it happened, all of that stuff. I get questions constantly. My Instagram DMs are constantly filled with questions, and rightfully so. It's something that I talk about, it's something that I advocate for, and so as I was starting to write out my story, I thought, all right, well, one, this is gonna be a really long blog, and so I want to be able to provide you guys with my story, what happened, how I kind of got to a point where I was actually formally diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. But I want to preface this whole thing with, I did not plan on doing a video, so I am in post-workout sweats, sitting on my couch. I'm actually in the middle of watching Harry Potter, so I'm getting work done, doing all this stuff, and I just decided, you know what, instead of putting it off, instead of trying to make things perfect and wait till the perfect time to try to set up a whole thing, I'm gonna just press play on here and we're gonna do this thing together, okay? So I want to start by saying that if you are struggling with anxiety, depression, any kind of mental health, any kind of feelings of suicide or hurting yourself, I want you to contact the suicide prevention line, see your doctor, or head to the emergency room. It's not something to, kind of joke around with. It's not something to kind of just put off. This is something that's serious, and it's something that affects people every single day. And I don't want you to be one of those people. So make sure that you seek help, that you talk to somebody, and that you lean in. So when it comes to my own story, I want to share with you guys my story from kind of beginning to now, which is, I am going to say, a good 2 decades worth of information. I'm not going to go through every day, every year, but I'm going to give you guys kind of how I got from point A all the way to now. So when I was 5 years old, it was my mom, my dad, and I. And we lived in an apartment, and my dad drove long haul trucks. So he would be gone overnight. He would be gone for days at a time. And so it was just my mom and I. And my mom was 8 months pregnant with my little sister. And I was in bed. It was nighttime. My mom had already said goodnight to me. And the way that our apartment was set up is my mom and dad's bedroom was kind of here. The living room was here. And then there was this really, really long hallway. I mean, probably it wasn't that long, but in my 5-year-old mind, it was really long, miles long. But anyways, so my parents' room was here, and mine was at the very opposite end of that hallway, the very opposite end of the apartment. And so in between parents' room and my room was the kitchen, which was also the entrance to the apartment, as well as the living room, and then the bathrooms on the other side, whatever. Oh my gosh, I scratched myself. Anyways, so in all of that, the door to our apartment was in between mine and my mom's bedroom. So we had both gone to bed. We had a puppy at the time. She wasn't really a puppy. She was 4 years old, and somebody broke into our house, and that person went into our house, went through all of our stuff, and my mom couldn't get to me. My mom couldn't get, she physically could not get from point A to point B because there was somebody in the middle. So my mom screamed to me, and I got in my closet. I closed the closet door, and I just sat there in the dark. And I can literally sit here and visualize being in that closet. And it takes a lot for me to not break out in tears and not kind of have a full-on panic attack. just like talking about it makes me shaky. It makes me fidgety. It's just like not a good thing. Anyway, so my mom was at the opposite end of the apartment doing what any parent would be trying to do or do. She threw absolutely anything and everything at this person that she could, from a lamp. She threw pillows. She threw anything that was hard, like jewelry boxes, anything that was like right beside her. Again, she was 8 months pregnant, and we were by ourselves. And she threw absolutely everything. She got to a point where she ran out of things to throw and actually threw our 4-year-old dog, who was, oh, there's my doggy, was actually very similar to Max. And so she threw everything. And I remained in my closet. Eventually, this person left. My mom called 911. The police came to our house. By the time my mom had made her way from her bedroom to my bedroom, I had come out of the closet and was sitting on my bed. And that's kind of where my story starts. When we kind of like moved on from all of that, not like really moved on, but as time passed, we moved out of that apartment and we moved into somewhere else. My dad stopped driving long haul and he was home every night. And I distinctly remember being in my room. It was shortly after my sister was born. And I was in my room and I remember waking up like unable to breathe. And I can still picture to this day that like nightmare that I had. It's gonna sound bizarre. It is bizarre. But my 5-year-old little mind, because of trauma of this whole thing, I had dreamt that I was in this like really dark room and there were like 3 or 4 black slides, like tube slides, kind of like you would see at like a water park or even like in a McDonald's playground. And I was at the top of it and there were these people dressed all in black that stood at the top. And basically you laid down head first and you went down, and at the very end of the slide was like this like machete thing that came down, and that's how you died. And so I remember like getting up and going to sit on the couch with my mom and like just like replaying this dream over and over and over in my head. And that was like sign 1 that there was a problem, like that I had suffered some kind of trauma from being broken into. And so with all of that, as I got older, I didn't talk about it. Like, I thought it was normal. I thought it was normal to have a fear of death. I thought it was normal to be like severely afraid of the dark. I thought it was normal to have what later were told to me as panic attacks. I thought it was normal to begin like picturing your death. And when I say that, I literally mean like picturing my death. Like I would be walking across the street or like about to walk across the street, and literally almost as if I was watching a movie and I was watching it like in the future, I would picture myself walking across the street and dying and like getting hit by a car or like whatever. And so like these were like very normal things, like normal to me. I didn't know any different. It was something that like I had dealt with for my whole life. And so with all of that, I didn't seek help. I didn't talk to my parents about it. I mean, they knew that I was afraid of the dark. My bedroom was in like the basement of our home. And it was like a split level, so I didn't even like going down the 2 sets of stairs to go into my basement. My dad would have to stand at the top of the stairs and like turn all the lights on and make sure that I got like into my bedroom with my light on in my bedroom before he could turn off the upstairs like stairwell lights and like leave the top of the stairs. So that happened until I was like 17. So when I got my driver's license, and I was driving on my own, I would often like get into a place where I would be getting into the car and I would have like a full-on panic attack. Not because I was afraid of driving, not because I was afraid of getting into an accident, but for fear that somebody was in the backseat of my car. And I was so petrified, and I would freeze up and have a full-on panic attack to the point that I couldn't even turn around to look into the back of the car. And that just wasn't, it just wasn't fun. And throughout all of this, I then had my girls, and when I had my second daughter, Zoe, that's when things like got really bad really fast. My first daughter, there had been a whole lot of court proceedings. There was a lot of stress. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of things. And when I had my second daughter, my husband and my now husband and I were planning our wedding. The court proceedings with my first daughter and all that stuff was like over. But I had this fear. I started to have postpartum anxiety, and like an intense amount of postpartum anxiety. So I would be in a place where I didn't want anybody to hold her. I didn't want anybody to go out of like the room that I was in if they were holding her. I didn't want anybody else to be around us. I didn't want to be around anyone else. I didn't want to leave the house. I was totally fearful that somebody was going to try to take her from me. And so that just like continued to get more intense. I sought help. I went for therapy. I seen a therapist for a number of months. I went on medication because my anxiety then started to turn into depression, because it was kind of like a chicken or the egg, and they kind of just like bounced off of each other. The more depressed I got, the more anxious I got, the more anxious I got, the more depressed I got. And then fast forward a little bit to when Aubrey was born in 2014, I was once again diagnosed with postpartum anxiety and depression, and I was actually referred to like it's like a women's mental health post-pregnancy kind of thing, because postpartum is such a big thing, and it's very, very dangerous, and it can be very, very scary. There are services like specifically for that time. So I was referred there. I had to go to the city for those appointments. And when I was there, it was the first time that I had ever met with a psychiatrist. And I'm like trying really hard to like talk and not be emotional, but like I can start a panic attack. I can feel a panic attack happening. So let's hope that doesn't happen while I am trying to film this. So, anyways, when I met with that psychiatrist, I was at that point formally diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And I get a lot of people that like roll their eyes at me when I say that I've been diagnosed with PTSD, because when we think societal like norm, when we think of PTSD, we think of like soldiers in combat, we think of like war veterans, we think of stuff like that. That is totally true, and those are, the kinds of people that we generally hear have post-traumatic stress disorder. But here's the thing, it is post-traumatic stress disorder, and that you can have PTSD from anything that is traumatic to you, and you can have like triggers and things that are within your environment that are very similar to the environment in which the traumatic event took place, that then trigger panic attacks or depression, or they trigger all kinds of like emotions that then affect your mental health. So I was formally diagnosed with all three of those things. I started on medication. I started weekly or bi-weekly, I can't remember, therapy sessions, and we started working with, how to control my breathing and how to control my environment and the things that I could do. And we started talking about the things that triggered me, or the things that made my anxiety worse, because even though the root of like all of this is that PTSD, and I also suffer from depression, the main like big guy in the middle, that's like kind of throwing all of this other stuff out of whack is my anxiety. And we needed to get that under control. We needed to, get to a place where I could function and I could feel okay in my skin. And while I was going through all of these therapy sessions, I remember them asking, what is the thing that makes you like the most anxious or like the most worried? And the thing that like really, really, really affects me, and it still does, I'm getting better at it. I'm getting like to a point where, things are improving. But I've always had, especially after having my kids, like I said, I had a fear of the dark, and I had a fear of people breaking in, and I had a fear of dying, and I had a fear of like never being safe. Like I always felt like there was going to be somebody somewhere, that I had to run from. And when I became a mom, all those fears became amplified, because now it wasn't me protecting myself, it was me protecting my kids. And that was one of the biggest things that I had to work through, because there were so many times where I would hear something outside, and it could have been like a dog, it could have been a raccoon, it could have been the wind, for crying out loud. Like it could have been anything. And if I was in bed and my girls are, oh my gosh, I'm not yawning because I'm tired, I'm yawning because I can't breathe. Yes, that's a thing. But anyways, so it wouldn't matter what the noise was. If I heard a noise outside, and I was anywhere, I could be on the couch like I am right now, I could be in bed, I would start shaking, I would start crying, I wouldn't be able to breathe, and I would freeze. Like it was almost as if like I lost all body movement. And this petrified me, because all I could think of is what would happen if somebody broke into the house. And without like my automatic body response, just like without my control, like without me doing anything, I just freeze. Like I turn into a freaking ice cube. Like I can't move, I can't do anything. Like I'm just this brick, like solid thing, like that's useless. And that's how I felt. And so it was because of all of those fears. And I really hated the fact that I felt like I couldn't protect my children. And that then caused like more anxiety, because anxiety is like totally cyclical and it sucks. See, I told you. My body's trying to like fight for oxygen because I'm fighting a panic attack. Whew. So that was one of my biggest things. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to protect my girls. And everybody around me kept saying, well, like that motherhood thing will kick in, or like that parental thing will kick in, and it'll just be adrenaline. And like, I wanted to believe them, but every time that I felt a potential threat, mind you, like everything was a potential threat. Like I said, like the wind, I was unable to move. I was unable to get up. I was unable to breathe. I was unable to function. And that was terrifying. So that became one of the main things that we focused on in my therapy sessions. It was one of the main things that they, helped me with. And we like kind of like got into this like step by step on how to face those fears. Oh my God. How to face those fears and how to not get over them, but to work through them. And it took a really long time, and it took a lot of pain, and it took a lot of energy, and it took a lot of conversation about things that I didn't want to have, that I didn't want to open up about. And I got to a really good place. I started trying to figure out the thing that was going to make me feel my best, and that ended up being fitness. I was very, very overweight from emotional eating and pregnancies and more emotional eating and mostly emotional eating because I didn't know how to deal with my depression or my anxiety. I didn't know that those things that I felt, that like utter despair, the helplessness, the like crippling fear, I didn't know those things weren't normal, because they were my normal, and they'd been my normal for as long as I could remember. So, when I started focusing on me, and this was like part of like my therapy, was part of like my getting better plan. So in addition to medication, I started just working out a little bit at a time. I started working out at home. I started focusing on like the foods that I was eating. I started trying. Oh my God. This happens to me all the time, you guys. I promise I'm not tired. But I started seeing like this faint little shimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Like I started to like feel hope. I started to feel like I was getting to a place where like I was going to be okay, and I was going to be able to be that mom that I wanted for my kids, and I was going to be able to go out and experience life and do things without thinking that I was going to die every time I stepped out of bed. Like I started to feel hope. And I started to see like a steady increase over the next year and a half. I was like, I don't even have words to describe like the amount of happiness and change and all of that stuff that I experienced. After a year, we started to decrease my medications, and I was able to get off of my anxiety and depression medications. And I felt like I had some kind of control. I still had panic attacks, but they weren't every day. And they might have been every other day, but I was able to deal with them, and I was able to find things and ways to like channel it and work through it. And that's what I needed. I never expected there to be like this magic thing where like it all went away, but I just wanted to get to a place where I could function and I could be okay. And then this is going to be like the hard part. And then in September of 2016, I became totally numb. And one of my best friends passed away at the age of 23. And I thought I was okay. I cried every day. I had more panic attacks than normal. My anxiety was much worse, but I thought I was okay. And I dove really, really hard into fitness. In the middle of October of 2016, I had been working out this whole time, but I really just like needed to like channel everything that I had into fitness and focusing on my fitness. And I got in incredible, oh my God, I got into incredible shape. And I naively felt like I was dealing with the mourning process okay. But I wasn't. I had kind of numbed myself to the entirety of the mourning process, and it started to creep up on me a little bit at a time. And I started to struggle with my anxiety, my depression. I constantly felt like I had no control. I constantly felt like there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't worth the help. I just fell really quickly in 2017, like, wow, at like light year speed fast, into a really, really, really dark place. I was having upwards of 7 to 10, maybe 12 some days, like severe panic attacks. I stopped communicating with people. I stopped going out of my house. I completely shut myself in. My anxiety and my depression got bad, like very bad. And I remember, I hadn't gone to therapy in a while. And I remember saying one day to my mom, we were at her house for dinner or something, and I was standing in the kitchen, and all I said was, I'm just not okay. And I broke down, and I just started crying, and I told her that I didn't feel like there was a place for me here on earth. And I have never, ever, ever been someone that has tried to commit suicide or felt the desire or the need to commit suicide. But my depression got to a place where it was scary. It was scary to be in my head, and it was scary to be in my head all the time, and I just wanted it to stop. I just wanted it to go away. I wanted to be able to escape, but instead I just felt like I was locked in this really, really dark space that I couldn't get out of. And it was terrifying, and it was lonely, and it didn't matter how much I fought. It felt like I was just falling deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I went back to the doctor and went back on medication, and that was even scarier when I got on that medication. And I'm not going to get into specifics on the medications that I take, or have taken, or any of that stuff, just because, like, everybody's different. But the first medication, the first antidepressant, anti-anxiety that I took, was the one that I had taken years prior, and it worked fine years prior. Within a couple of weeks of starting this medication, you're optimistic and you're hoping that it gets better and you're hoping that you see improvement. And I started having suicidal thoughts. I started, like, almost unconsciously, like, picturing how to commit suicide, or the ways in which I could do it, or the way, like, I started thinking, like, without my control. Like, it's so hard to explain. But I started, having these thoughts of, like, how I could conceal it from people, and what I would leave behind. And I felt so strongly that, like, my girls and my husband would be better off without me. And it wasn't normal. And so I went right back to the doctor, like, right away. And we changed my medication, and it takes a while for the side effects from one to wear off, and then you get a whole, like, other set of side effects from another drug that you're taking, and all you're hoping is that all of this shit, all of this, like, fucking hellhole that you're in gets you somewhere different. that you get to a place where like you can just survive and you can enjoy life again and you can see the world for what it is and be happy and like enjoy your life and smile for real. And I can honestly say I was losing hope. Like I didn't think that I was ever going to get out of that. Like I was ever going to get to a place where I could survive. And that second medication, it started to take, and I started to feel better. But we had to continually up the dose and up the dose and up the dose. And there was no more upping the dose. And I still, there was still more that we needed to do. And in this whole time, I was fighting emotional eating. I was fighting like daily, sometimes hourly panic attacks. I was unable to sleep. I was dealing with everything that my whole life had always been, like in terms of my anxiety, but I was dealing with it like tenfold. There was like a not a waking moment in my day where I wasn't overcome by my anxiety. And then I got a referral to see a different psychiatrist to talk about what is called a booster medication. And so, mind you, this entire time, like this current amount of time in 2017, I was going to therapy. And then I started to see a psychiatrist, and I was put on a booster medication. My current psychiatrist is fantastic. I kind of feel like a crazy person when I say that I see a psychiatrist. But it's just like seeing like an oncologist. And I want that to be something that like, if you're suffering and struggling through mental health, I don't want you to be ashamed of it. I don't want you to be ashamed of saying, that you're going to therapy, or that you see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a mental health counselor, because you wouldn't shame somebody for going and seeing a cardiologist or seeing an oncologist or, any other like specialty doctor. You would not judge somebody for that. But mental health in our society is viewed differently. But if you're suffering from it, I don't want you to view it that way. I don't want you to put yourself in a position where you feel less than, or you feel like there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just part of your journey. It's part of your story, and it's part of who you are, and that's okay. What's not okay is not seeking help for fear of judgment. Seek help. They're there for a reason. So I went to this psychiatrist. We talked about all the options. We talked about, the like extreme need for me to feel better and to find a solution. My daily workouts, I do those as like another dose of medication. I could not survive my day if it wasn't for my workouts. There's just no way. They help channel that like fight or flight mode that is anxiety. So there was once a time where we needed to run away from like lions and tigers and bears. You get my point. But we don't need to do that now. And when I just like wake up with a panic attack, well, like what, all these like hormones and things are happening in my body, and like they don't need to be there. So I move into a workout so that at least they have a release. At least all of that like adrenaline and all of this like buildup of hormone and all of this like overwhelm that I feel, I can channel into something similar to running from a lion. And it helps. It helps immensely. So if there's like one tip of like personal advice that I would give you guys is if you're struggling with anxiety or depression, find a daily fitness routine. Find something that you can do every day, not as a chore, not as a weight loss, not as anything, but as a release, as a way to move your body and give your body a release. And that's what it needs. It's one of the best things for mental health, and it's one of the most underused. So find a good fitness routine that suits your life, that suits your likes, because if you don't like to run, then don't run. If you like to dance, then find like a dance class or a dance workout video or a dance program or like whatever it is. Find a YouTube video, but just move and find something that brings you joy in doing so. And this booster medication, we went through all the pros and cons of all the different ones, and the one that we went with for a number of reasons, but it was one of those ones that like makes it worse before it gets better. And so the first 3 weeks of starting this booster medication were terrifying, like horrifying, and I don't really want to go into too much of that. But like, it was like the scariest movie you've ever seen times like 100. And that was in my brain, and that was my life. And I didn't like to be alone, and I would go to my mom's like almost every day for those couple of weeks. It was just not good. And now I feel like me. Like I still have panic attacks, you guys. But I've come to realize that like they're just a part of who I am. Just like my arm is part of who I am, my anxiety disorder is just part of who I am. And it's never been about getting rid of it, because it's not like a virus. It's not something that I can get rid of. I would never just cut off my left arm just because, although I don't really use it and it's kind of useless, but that's not the point. I would never cut it off. And I can't just get rid of my anxiety. I can manage it and I can implement things that will help it, but I can't just get rid of it. And so I have gotten to a point where I'm able to actually manage it, and I'm able to be in a place where I take a morning medication and I take an evening medication, and they're necessary, and it is what it is, and it doesn't make me weak, and it doesn't make it that there's something wrong with me or anything. I wouldn't tell somebody not to take insulin if they were diabetic, and it's the same thing. I need the medication to balance out the chemicals in my body, and that's okay. And I make sure, on top of, taking those medications, I make sure that I work out every day and that I eat healthy, because yes, your food and the things that are in your food and the kinds of food that you eat can affect anxiety and depression and all kinds of other things. And so I know the kinds of foods that impact my mental health negatively. So I avoid them or I limit them, because it's life, and I talk about it more, and I share my story. And, since sharing and figuring this all out and going through the last several years of figuring it all out, I actually learned something I never knew in like my entire life. And that is, one, that it runs in my family, that there are a number of people on my mom's dad's side that struggle with mental health, and that a number of them are still and have been for a long time on antidepressants or anti-anxiety or some kind of medication. And that's something that I didn't know because nobody talks about it. Nobody shares about it. Nobody lets other people in. Everybody keeps it a secret because society has made it as if there's something wrong with us, as if there's something that we need to hide or be ashamed of. But we don't. Talk to somebody. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's, like if you have to start with like talking to your cat, talk to your cat and then work up from there. But just talk to somebody. You're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. And you don't have to be ashamed of it. Will I be on medication forever? I don't know. Will I be on medication for the next 2 years? Yeah. And the plan from there is to then see if we can take me slowly off of medication in 2 years. And then if I relapse and my body can't adjust, then I go back on and we wait 5 years. And then if those 5 years are up, 7 years from now, if we have to try to, we wean me off of medication again and it doesn't work, and I, relapse again and I have an issue with my anxiety and my depression again, then I just stay on them. It is what it is. And I've just accepted it. And there are still mornings where I am abruptly woken up by a panic attack. There are days where I still have a panic attack for absolutely no reason. There are situations that happen in my life that trigger an anxiety attack. I have like a daily, not daily, but in an emergency situation kind of situation. Said situation too many times. Where I take an in the moment anti-anxiety on top of those 2 other additional medications. Just says what it is. They go everywhere with me. They are my lifeline. It's just that simple. So I hope that sharing my story will help even just one person. You're not alone. And it might go up and down, and you might feel really good for a really long time, and then something might happen in your life that sends you into like a tornado, and that's okay. It's okay to reach out for help, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to take medication, and it's okay to not take medication, and it's okay to do the things that you need to do. But my top pieces of advice, as somebody who has dealt with this for over 2 decades, is seek help, talk about it. Fitness will change your life. It doesn't matter what it is. And don't be ashamed. Like, you would never look at somebody that was diabetic and say that they should be ashamed for being diabetic. You wouldn't tell them not to take insulin. You wouldn't judge them for having to take insulin. Having anxiety and depression and needing assistance and needing help and needing therapy or needing to see a psychiatrist or needing a service animal or needing your life to be a certain way in order for you to be okay, those are all things that are okay. It's okay for you to adjust your surroundings, your environment to be okay. And I've done a lot of those things. I work from home on purpose. And yeah, it fits in with a lot of things, but it also fits in with my anxiety. And we ended up getting Max and trained him as an emotional support animal. And there are a lot of things that I do on a daily basis that people might judge me for. People might say things. People might not understand, and that's okay. I'm not here to have them understand, but I just wanted to share my story, share my journey, because I know that I'm not alone, and neither are you, and there are ways that you can get through it, and there are ways that you can deal with it, and just don't be afraid to ask for help. Make sure that you like I started this whole thing, if you have thoughts or feelings of suicide, please call the suicide prevention line, and I'll leave the number down here actually, because that's really important, and it needs to be something that's accessible to everyone. So that's my story. And anxiety looks different on everyone. Depression looks different on everyone. And just because somebody is smiling and laughing and they seem like everything is, all perfect, doesn't mean that it is. So I love you guys.